Overtime is winning time for Leon Draisaitl. 30 seconds to play in overtime of Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, and he nets the game winner off the stick of Connor McDavid. The dynamic duo in Edmonton win it 4-3 in overtime as the Oilers improve to 4-0 all-time in overtime games in the Stanley Cup Final. Last year, they lost the first 3 games of the Stanley Cup Final to the Panthers, stormed back to force a Game 7. Here, they set the tone in Game 1. They rallied from a 3-1 deficit, get it to overtime, and that is where Leon Draisaitl nets his 3rd overtime goal of the postseason. That is tied for the most in a single postseason in NHL history. Get some instant analysis. Welcome to CBS Sports HQ hockey analyst Pete Blackburn. Pete, what an ending. Connor McDavid to Leon Draisaitl, the dynamic duo in Edmonton strike, and they win it. Your reaction is what when you saw that go into the back of the net?
My reaction was, thank God the Oilers ended up winning that game, because the longer it went on, the more it felt like they needed to win that game because they were tilting the ice in their favor. And then after the Tomas Nosek over the glass penalty in overtime, you know, one of those, I think boneheaded is a bit too strong of a term, but that's a very costly mistake if you're Nosek there, and you want to pounce all over it if you're the Oilers. So I felt like they absolutely needed to score on that power play. They get it, but really the story is they started to tilt the ice from the 3rd period on. When you look at the shot totals, it was 24-8 in favor of the Oilers from the 3rd period on, and 14-2 in the 3rd period, and then after surviving an initial push from Florida in overtime, it was all Edmonton. So a really good opportunity to seize a first game, make a statement, and take your first Stanley Cup Final lead in over 30 years if you're the Edmonton Oilers.
Well, and of course, it was Connor McDavid to Leon Draisaitl, right? Something we saw numerous times in the regular season. That was what it was going to be here for Edmonton. To win this series, to get off to a good start, to set the tone, you got to have your superstars be superstars.
Yeah, 100%. And I felt like in the first half of this game, Edmonton didn't do enough without those 2 guys on the ice. Like when those 2 guys were on the ice individually or together, they were controlling play. But when everybody else was on, it was just, not much happening in terms of generation for the Oilers. So I think they need to do a better job at, having the depth show through. And obviously it's not an easy task when you're going up against a Florida Panthers team that is also very deep and very talented. But it can't be a 2-man show for the Oilers in this series if they want to win. So I think they need to see a little bit more, but over the course of this game in the second half, I think they got stronger and you started to see a little bit more across the board.
Yeah, and you saw in that overtime session, Kapanen off the post, Trent Frederick had a great shot, Sergei Bobrovsky with the great stop there. You could feel the momentum coming there for Edmonton. When you saw all of those chances for Edmonton and you're seeing the clock tick down, it's now 30 seconds left, and you said it right there, they had to score on that power play, or perhaps they don't win this game because we go to a double overtime, we break the momentum. Why was that so critical there in that moment when you see Corey Perry to Connor McDavid to Leon Draisaitl?
I mean, you said it. You feel like if you escape that overtime as Florida, you feel like you have a little bit of new life. There's a reset button pushed. Maybe you kill off that penalty that was a huge mistake and a gaffe, and you catch your breath, you regroup, and you come out for the second overtime, maybe with the same push that you did in the first overtime, and get a little bit more luck early on. You win that game. It would be a tough one to stomach if you're the Oilers, especially a big part of the reason why I think the Oilers needed this game as well is because Sergei Bobrovsky made some big saves, but I didn't feel like he was overall all that good in this game. He gave up a lot of rebounds, looked a little bit shaky, made things look a little bit more difficult than they needed to, and I know the save total there pretty high because they put a ton of shots on him, but he didn't have his best game. So when you look at what happened in last year's Stanley Cup Final where he came out and he stole Game 1, you want to take advantage of when Sergei Bobrovsky looks mortal or average or even slightly above average, below average. If he's not great, try to take as many games from the Panthers while Sergei Bobrovsky is not on his God tier play. So I felt like that was a pretty big reason why they needed this game as well.
You were on the Oilers here in game one. They make you look smart. I was on the over. We get that, of course, with the overtime winner. The Panthers had won 30 straight playoff games when leading after 2. They had a 3-1 lead. They let that slip away. Who do you put this loss on?
I mean, I don't know if I put it on anybody individually. I just don't think that they were strong enough down the stretch in this game. And then obviously, if you want to point a finger, you can point it at Tomas Nosek, who threw the puck over the glass and ends up giving up the the power play goal in overtime. That's an easy finger to point. Otherwise, I just think you need a little bit of a stronger effort all around. And they obviously left Leon Draisaitl open in the slot in overtime, which is, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. And now you're talking about Leon Draisaitl with 2 goals in this game, 2 more goals than he had in the entire Stanley Cup final last year. So in our pregame hit, I talked about how Leon Draisaitl's health could be the biggest difference in this series versus last year when he was clearly banged up. If you're Florida, you see the output that you got from Draisaitl in this very first game, and I think that scares you a little bit.
It's only 1 game, but it's a big game 1. And when you consider that Edmonton won game 1 of the Stanley Cup in 1990 against Boston, that was the last time they won the Stanley Cup. How can you not get romantic about hockey when here the Oilers win in overtime of game 1 of the Stanley Cup some 35 years later? Here we are with their 2 superstars getting them the win. This feels like the beginning of a story that's about to be written for Edmonton, with Chris Knobloch, by the way, who's in his 2nd season as head coach, and not even a 2nd full season, getting his team back to the Stanley Cup final. It's an incredible story that's already been written.
It's not already been written.
I'm not saying it's written. I'm saying game 1. I'm just saying it feels already magical, Pete, already like this when you look back at history.
I appreciate the efforting here of trying to spin a narrative of a very, very nice story. We got a lot of hockey left to be played. You will not find me coming away with these strong takeaways based off of game 1. I think that if you're Edmonton, you feel very good about taking the first game here, especially with how well Florida has played on the road in these playoffs. I feel like it was very important for Edmonton to take the first one, get a little bit of confidence behind them, especially after the way that game 1 went in last year's series and falling into a 3-0 hole. If you can take that off the table immediately like they did here tonight, I think that's a very big step. But we are not writing stories after game 1. That is not happening.
The beginning of a magical story. I said the beginning.
It's a rough draft right now.
It's a rough draft. Fair enough. I'll take the. I like the rough draft. I like the romanticizing here of what happens in a game 1. Certainly the Oilers feeling good, but far from over. Of course, last season we saw it go to a game 7 in which the Panthers had to survive and win their first Stanley Cup. But it's the Panthers that are down 0-1 now, and game 2 coming your way Friday back in Edmonton. Pete Blackburn here with us on CBS Sports HQ. Pete, thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm all for a good series, but that's pretty cool when you see Connor McDavid to Leon Draisaitl to win it. So, Oilers are 4-0 all-time in overtime games in the Stanley Cup final. And again, as I mentioned, they won game 1 of the 1990 Stanley Cup final. Last time they won the Stanley Cup. Look, here they are. 35 years later, they won game 1 of the Stanley Cup final. Perhaps history will repeat itself. And let's get right to the site. Welcome in CBS Sports HQ reporter Mike Cugno, who joins us from Edmonton. And Mike, give us your vantage point of that game winner. How sweet, how awesome it looked as it developed in front of you.
This is actually the vantage point. You're actually looking right down the ice from our level where we watched that game winner. Anytime Connor McDavid touches the puck, everyone seems to float up out of their seats here, and that's what happened there. It's like Barry Bonds stepping up to the plate, just wondering if he's going to hit a home run. And, of course, Connor McDavid, he doesn't hit the home run in terms of a goal. He hits a home run in terms of that feed to Leon Draisaitl. This place went nuts. It was so loud to kick off the night. And it just felt like you knew Edmonton was going to strike first in those first few minutes just because of the energy and the buildup. Not just tonight, but really the last 6 days leading into this series. Draisaitl starts it, Draisaitl finishes it, but of course, Connor McDavid has his fingerprints all over this game as well.
Mike, you've covered this Panthers club for quite some time now. They had won 30 straight playoff games when leading after 2. They're up 3-1. They let it slip away. What can you say about the Panthers now having to come back to respond in Game 2?
I say this, they're a very good road team in the postseason. 8-2 coming into the night, so they're 8-3 now, but they're going to have to win here on the road to win this series anyway. They've clinched each series so far away from home ice. So doing it on the road isn't something they're not used to. In fact, it's how they've made a living in this postseason. I was talking to players earlier today in the locker room, and they said it was basically foot on the gas all night. You couldn't slip up, you couldn't have mistakes, and you couldn't let the top two guys, Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid, get going. They couldn't do that tonight, but it seems like they know the formula. Really, in that overtime, Stuart Skinner, Sergei Bobrovsky played excellent. It was going to take a mistake from someone for there to be a breakthrough, and that was Nosek sending the puck over the wall, leading to that power play and the eventual game winner.
What did you think of that? Because some might say it's boneheaded, but it may be going too far to say it's boneheaded. It's almost like a balk in baseball. It's like going off sides in football, something like that, where we sometimes try to compare those little minor mistakes because, again, it's a minor penalty, but it's a little mistake with a huge impact on the ice.
Yeah, it is. And look, obviously it has a huge impact on the outcome and could have a huge impact on the outcome of this series, but you can't put it all on him. I know the Panthers led after that first period thanks to a couple goals, but really Edmonton looked like the dominant team, and they really did in the first and the third. The Panthers had their footing there in the second, but that second period, Stuart Skinner starts to make a couple saves, and you can start to feel the energy in the building start to turn. Then they respond, then they get the equalizer, and then from there it just felt like the Panthers were on their heels. They started out pretty quick when the overtime started, but after that, it felt like it was mostly Edmonton the rest of the way.
All right, we will see Mike back in Edmonton on Friday for Game 2. The Panthers looking to even up the series before heading back to Sunrise. Mike Cugno here on CBS Sports HQ. Mike, thanks. This is the 19th Stanley Cup Final Game 1 in history to go to overtime. 14 of the previous 18 Game 1 overtime winners went on to win the series. Perhaps some foreshadowing as Leon Draisaitl nets his third overtime goal in a single postseason. That's tied for the most in NHL history. The Oilers setting the tone in Game 1.